Hey, Elon, how you doing?
Hey, good day. I am doing very well, thank you.
Good.
Nothing happened since yesterday.
Okay. Being uneventful can be a good thing, you know. Here's Eloise. Okay. I guess everybody's getting kind of a slow start this morning. Hey, how you doing, Eloise?
Hey, hello, good morning.
Hey.
Hi, John.
Hello, how you doing? Definitely a slow start. I think it's the cloudy weather.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Has anybody heard about the tropical storm hurricane heading through here?
Yeah, basically nothing here.
Well, no, we're not going to get a lot, but this is the result, you know, because
Yes.
it's swinging up through Florida and through the south part of Georgia into South Carolina, maybe North Carolina. Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, I'm surprised we haven't gotten more rain from it than we have, but I guess we're on the wrong side of it.
That's what they say.
Yes.
That's enough for me.
Yeah. Anyhow, well, and Betty's here. Hey, Betty, how you doing?
Good. I'm good.
Good. I'm glad to see you here. Anyway, today we're going to get started because it is that time. I want to introduce you to an artist you may and or may not have been familiar with, okay? His name was Nikolai Fechin. He was Russian. We're going to watch a video on his art, and then we're going to talk about an artist that in many ways was influenced, you know, by Fechin, though not directly. And this is a guy who, contemporary artist. His name is Edward Gonzalez, and he does sort of southwestern style art, but he does it with kind of a very unique perspective because he's Mexican American. And you'll see that in his paintings, you know, the subject matter, things like that. But they're really, really nicely done. And for those of you who like color, you'll probably like his work quite a bit. And another artist, her last name is Yeoman. Is it Jessica? Sarah. Yeah, Sarah, who is a watercolor artist and who just happens to be a fan of Daniel Smith watercolors, of which I bought a bunch. Not intentionally, but, you know, I went out and when last time we saw the Brush Lady, she had a whole bunch of these Daniel Smith watercolors, and she was willing to sell them to me for, you know, really, really cheap, about $3 a tube. Now, Daniel Smith's, if you buy them in the store, are about $12 to $15 a tube for watercolor. And there's some really, really interesting paint because he has a lot of like pearlescent and not really metallic, but, you know, more or less pearlescent sort of elements in the paint itself. And so it does some really interesting stuff. And I think you'll enjoy her work as well. And so we're going to start off, like I said, with Nikolai Fechin. And this is on YouTube, but it was produced by PBS. And we'll give you kind of an overview of some of his work and his life. And it's an interesting story. So I would definitely encourage you, take some notes, maybe go back, look at some more of his work a little bit later. because probably more than almost any other artist who's come to this country, Fetchin influenced American art in so many ways, and particularly that whole movement of Southwestern art, you know, in what we call Western art now. He really was kind of at the very forefront of starting that whole Taos, New Mexico art movement. And, you know, it's got some beautiful work. I think you'll really enjoy it. So anyway, we're going to jump in and start with that. Yep, that's the one. That's the one we want right there. Okay. So this will be, I think it's what, like 14 minutes, okay? So this is not like a long video. But I think you'll like it. So away we go.
Educated at the Imperial Academy in St. Petersburg, Russia, renowned painter Nikolai Fashin moved to Taos, New Mexico in 1923.
The most important thing about Fashin's life was creativity and being to express that and creating out of so much love and hard work this amazing work of art in a building. The woodwork in the house shows definitely a Russian influence as far as the benches over the radiators. You see that sort of thing because heat is a very important thing in Russia. There's an icon corner in the dining room, which is very typical Russian, that you have your family's icons in there. His house is not a combination of different cultural references. It's a summation and a synthesis of all of them. There's the Art Deco of his time. There's the Hispanic / Moorish influence of the Spaniards who came up through Mexico. There's the Puebloan tradition. There's a rich, rich tradition in what he brought back, carefully preserved from Russia in his mind and his memory. The cultural traditions that span the church, Russian farmhouses, and the indigenous peoples of the Tartar Republic. All of these are merged in the style that he came up with. He was a quiet man and obviously very driven by the amount of work that was produced in this home, with the wood carving and all the paintings. He had to keep his commissions going. He had to continue to get commissions, fill commissions, and market his own artwork. So the mere building of a house and the mere creation of an entire household full of furniture, that was relegated to the evening. He spent his whole day painting by the natural light in his studio, which has a beautiful and extraordinary north window, which was the first thing he created when he came to Taos. My mother always said that he felt at home here in Taos because the mountains reminded him of the mountains in Russia and the Caucasus, and the aspects of tribes and different cultures. So that was part of why he was drawn here. He was sad to leave Russia, but it was for the safety of his family at that point. Feshin adored his father. And there's a wonderful quote. He talks about his father telling him, Feshin, telling Nikolai as a young man, put the candle out, come to bed. Put the candle out, come to bed. Nikolai's drawing. Of course, he's surrounded by art materials. It's his father's workshop. So he's self-taught. He picks up these materials and draws. Father says, put the candle out, come to bed. Okay, he keeps going. Put the candle out, come to bed. So finally, the father, in exasperation, picks him up by the scruff of his neck, drops him into bed, blows out the candle, and goes to bed. He never punished him for this. He just had to get him to go to sleep. He could paint his father for years after his father died. And he did. He could paint and draw him. And one of the sweetest paintings I've seen in the many, many paintings that Nikolai did of his family is of his father fishing. And the focus is all on his hands and what his hands are doing. When he was a provincial, self-taught artist who came to the Imperial Academy in St. Petersburg, he gets accepted because of the excellence of the work he did at the Kazan Art School. In your second year or the third year, you got to apply to work in the studio of whichever painter you admired the most. And everybody wanted to be in the studio of Ilya Repin. This was the most famous artist in Russia, bar none, friend of Leo Tolstoy, an eminent personality. He gets accepted into Repin's studio. Repin's studio is filled with paintings that we would now call historic paintings in the Beaux-Arts tradition. Repin saw that Kolya, the diminutive for Nikolai, had the ability to paint these multiple figures, that he had the skill to do it. And at one point, Nikolai said, I'm not doing that. He said no to the preeminent painter of Russia. He, a nobody, said, no, I can't do that. I have to understand each face, each spirit and personality, and make sure I've got that before I can go on and paint the next figure. So I'm not interested in painting huge crowd scenes and magnificent historical paintings. I want to paint people as I see them and their nature as it comes through their face. The Russian paintings are huge. That was what they did in the academy, big scenes. There's a famous one of Feshin's called The Slaughterhouse. There's one called the Cabbage Festival, and it's, you know, groups of people all around cabbages in the springtime. There's little faces that pop out that you can look at it 20 times and see a new face, or a little dog, or a little baby, or a person dancing, or whatever it might be. Most of those paintings, though, are more muted in their colors. When they're hanging next to the pieces he did in America, those are bright colors. I really appreciate his impressionist style and layering of paint, and how you have, if you look closely, a glob of paint. but you back up and it's a beautiful flower or face. I think his portraits of my mother primarily show the love he had for her, and through the eyes and through the expressions. There's just a warmth or caring in there, and a familiarity. Obviously, it's my mother. My impression largely derived also from the fellowship and meeting what he had written. However, you can look directly at his paintings. They speak for themselves. There are two paintings he did. He did a number of his wife. She was one of his favorite subjects. He did a painting of her before he married her, and he did a painting of her the year that he married her. The first painting is the painting of a man who's falling in love with his subject. The face is beautiful, but it is a face that floats on thick black paint. You can't even see the rest of the body. This is an expression of emotion that's not attached to something. The second painting is Alexandra on the Volga. This is the year they were married. It's luminous, it's blue. She's looking up, not out or down. It's very sensuous. She's partly disrobed. She has a white sheet around her. It's filled with water and light and love and beauty. And this is a man who knows that he has a place in the other person's affections. It's indications like that that lead an art historian to understand better what it is that the painter is experiencing when he's painting. It's not one painting in itself. It's the way the painting relates to the whole body of his work. I think getting to the soul of the person, the more interesting the face, the more he was drawn to it. My mother always said that she was an easy model because she was there. But at a certain point, when she perhaps was in her 20s or 30s, he stopped using her as a model. And she finally asked, well, you know, I am available if you need me. And he said, well, you don't have that image of youth that has its interest, and you're not old enough to be interesting right now. You're in the in-between. I think that from somewhere, this shy man drew on a well of confidence and of eloquence that came through no matter what the circumstances of his art were. And I think that that was the source of a great deal of his strength. And I think it is the source of the strength in his paintings. He was so able and so fluent with what he did that he could afford to be open and vulnerable to what was new and different. And I think that for him to have preserved that through a long and prolific life is an extraordinary exercise of human eloquence. His life in Taos was one of the most productive periods. And I think in part that is because he was so engaged in the landscape and the people around him, as well as in the commissions that he was producing for clients, sitters all over the world. So he was actively pursuing that core part of his career, but he was so stimulated by this environment. You can find paintings that he did of Arroyo Hondo. You can find paintings that he did of San Cristobal. You can see paintings he did of the entire region around here. I think he was just abundantly nourished by what he saw here and what he discovered. And remember, this was his language. The way that he spoke was through his art. So to respond to this region, he painted.
Okay. Sorry about it. Seems like the
The
volume.
secretive image projecting devices to help them draw faster and better.
Okay. Seemed like the volume on that was really kind of funky. At any rate, but in looking at his work, anybody have any thoughts about the paintings that you saw?
The guy is impressive.
Yeah, he was. Um, you know, that was a pretty, I think it was a pretty good, like, biography of Sechin. But what they seem to leave out or miss in that presentation was really his effect on all the American artists around him. You know, Taos and really the Southwest at that point in time was really just beginning to attract a lot of American artists, you know, particularly landscape artists and contemporary artists. Georgia O'Keeffe, for example, would be a you know, a name that you guys might recognize. And you know, in looking at the different types of work that were being produced, you know, in say the 20s and 30s, you know, in that area, you know, there were some amazing artists, you know, coming from that area of the United States, and some of the art that was being produced, probably some of the best that's ever been done. You know, if you look at American art history, quote unquote. But you know, Fetchin really was a major influence on a lot of different American artists, and still is an influence today. You know, if you take people like Richard Schmid and a lot of plein air and contemporary painters, and you look at their painting technique, and Schmid's in particular is very parallel to Fetchin's. You know, you look at the application of paint and the way how loose that they use it, and really lay down, you know, a really heavy, direct, you know, paint body on the surface, and they're both very masterful about, you know, putting that paint down and being able to manipulate it in a way that you know, when you're right there at the easel looking at the painting, it just looks like globs of paint. But then you step a few feet back, and all of a sudden it all comes together into being, you know, this image that holds together, you know, really well. And so I really admire his work. You know, I would kind of disagree with a little bit of what they said, in the sense that I find his palette really kind of subtle and really low key. You know, he used some intense color, but he used it in a way where he had a little bit of color in generally kind of a overall muted or neutral background. And it really just made the color sing, because it was against all of these neutrals. You know, in some ways, if you look in some areas of the painting, you know, they were kind of these browns and grays and very kind of earthy colors. And then he would have a human face, and you would begin to see, you know, the different flesh tones and things that he would mix, and it really made those colors pop and sing. So he really knew how to use color, you know, but he was very restrained with it. You know, I think, you know, that's just my view. But if you look at a large body of his work, I think you'll kind of agree. Okay, so I want to share with you two other artists though. But before we move on, anybody got anything to say about Fetchin?
There really wasn't that much on his American painting. It seemed like the influence that you talked about, then you didn't really see much of that after he was here in the States.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that they showed was art that he had actually done in Russia. But I think the
Correct.
reason that it was kind of limited to that is that that house has become a museum. And that's the art that they basically had available to them, was the art that was hanging in the house. And that's pretty much so what they showed. They showed a couple of paintings that he had done in Russia that were not, in this country. They were still back actually in Russia. But those were the earlier, larger paintings.
Hello.
You have people calling. Not okay.
That happens when you're important.
Pardon?
That happens when you are popular.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, we could get into a long discussion about how popular I am. So anyway, but we'll save that for another time. Anyway, that led me into, I wanted to share a contemporary artist, somebody who's alive and working today, not well known necessarily, but a very good, competent artist, and working in sort of that Southwestern style and subject matter. And so I'm going to introduce you to him now. Let's take a look at his work. There we go. All right, get the right set of images. Okay. All right, so this is the work of Edward Gonzalez. Okay, now I'm not exactly sure where Edward lives. He lives somewhere in the Southwest, probably Santa Fe, Taos, in that area. But he's Mexican-American. He's on Facebook, easy to find. He has not a lot of paintings, posted on Facebook. But, in looking at his work, it's really, one, I like the process he goes through, and number two, the overall end result. Now, he works in oil as well as acrylic. But generally, before he does a painting, it seems to be that he and I have similar habits in that he'll do preliminary pieces, smaller studies. Now, where I might work with oil or acrylics or watercolor to kind of flesh out a concept, he seems to do a lot of drawing. And in particular, he likes using color pencil. And this is a color pencil piece, obviously, a big sombrero from the top down. And, he's got various elements, of Mexican culture there. The Aztec, Quetzalcoatl, and then, the eagle, and, various animals and things that you would find throughout the Southwest and Mexico. And again, this is a color pencil piece. Now, he tends to work relatively large. This color pencil piece is a 24 by 24 inch drawing. So if that sheet of paper is 24 inches, then, that's basically about 18, well, probably about 20 inches or more across, just the drawing itself. So these are fairly big pieces. And to do that as a preliminary and to do it in this medium as colored pencil, it's a bit of an investment in time. But, he works these things out, pretty thoroughly. Now this is a finished painting, you know, same subject matter, you know, different style. But I believe, no, I don't have this documented, but I think it's probably an acrylic painting. And he goes back and forth, you know, between acrylics and oils. You know, so some of his pieces are acrylics, some of them are oils. But those are the only two sombreros he has. These are Stargazer lilies. And, you know, for some of you who really like color, you know, this guy uses a lot of color, and he uses it, you know, very intensely. You know, but he manages it really well. He balances, you know, his color systems, you know, really well. And so, and everything seems to be, you know, fairly well drawn, you know, but simplified and kind of graphic in a way. And you'll see more of that as we go through his work. Landscape. Now, some of them are like, you know, like 72 inches. You know, I think that's the biggest dimension that I saw him working in. But that's 6 feet, you know. So, you know, I mean, these are not small paintings. You know, these are fairly large. But if you take a look, at the paintwork here, and again, you know, what he does with, whoop, that went away, sorry. Okay, yeah, what he does with the color and how, you know, he works color into color, you know, in these areas. You know, they're not just one thing. You know, he's got little hints of other mixtures, you know, within this area of the painting, all throughout it. So, you know, he's very, you know, conscientious about, you know, the color that he's mixing and how he's using it and how he's laying it down. You know, the really nice use of, again, you know, simplified shapes. You know, if you look at the trees and things like that, you know, they become almost a graphic element. You know, they're very simplified and kind of blocky, but it gives kind of solidity, you know, to his compositions. And again, you know, look at the use of how he manages color, you know, throughout this. He still gets, you know, this mountain, you know, to move backward and to sit behind, you know, all these other elements. Not only, you know, because he physically overlaps it, but also because he's, you know, taken steps to just modify the color just a little bit to mute it down, to get it to sink backward, you know, behind these tree lines here. And the same thing, you know, with the tree lines. He, again, overall, if you squint your eye down, the general value in this big mass of trees through here is generally darker than, say, the middle ground. And then as it comes to the foreground, so he takes you back into some sort of shadow. And so it really draws your eye, really, from this point, you know, up, you know, through the figure, because the value structure overall, where this is where all the light is, you know, in the painting. I'm going to blow that up a bit.
Charles.
Yeah.
Charles, why would he make the area where the basket is darker now?
Well, again, you know, what he's doing is he's keeping your eye focused really right in the area that he wants you to look, which is really the upper part of the body, right in here. and the mid-ground.
Okay.
See? Because that's his subject matter. The rest of this is all kind of subordinate. Is it really important that you see all the details and things down by your feet in the basket? Not so much.
No, I was just wondering why we talk about moving back so much, why it wouldn't make it move back.
Well, he doesn't, actually, because of the contrast. See, this still moves forward. Let's see, let's blow that up a little bit. And it gets a little pixelated at that size. But see, all the values get darker. It's almost like you've got a triangle down here at the bottom of the painting. Pull back out a little bit. There you go. Yeah, so you put this triangular shape, like right in here, which is generally, the values are darker in that area. And then you have above that, sort of again, this triangle kind of comes up, here. That is light. And then you've got the upper, part of the painting, which is kind of a rectangle shape, which generally falls back into generally darker values again. So, he's broken this up, into value ranges, to kind of create the composition of this. It's really, pretty nicely done. If you look at, again, if you look at like the fabric, and you feel, you actually feel the form of her, underneath the clothing. And, he hasn't futzed around and put in every little fold. And, we talk about this a lot in both drawing and painting. When it goes into like trying to paint fabrics and stuff like that, how he doesn't have a lot of repetitive, shapes and sizes, all throughout this piece of clothing here. He simplifies it down and uses just the essential folds and changes in value to give you enough information to tell you that piece of fabric is laying, across and around her body. When it comes, to the face itself, again, it's fairly simplified, but, it's broken up into, he's got light on the side plane of her head, right, and the top. So you see light up here and here on her hair, which is generally black, right? But it's not. He's got different, like violets, blues, even greens slightly in there, as it kind of transitions into this black. And again, it holds together, all the light, is right here, on like the side of her face, the top, her hair and her shoulder. And then the front of the face and the neck, you have a cast shadow, back onto the clothing. And so, see, again, it's these blocks of value that he's working with, and I like the way he, he manages, those transitions, those changes in value. He seems to understand that really well, and do it pretty effectively. This is another piece, a little more graphic. But again, look at the color and how he managed it. See, these mountains and things still feel like they're sitting far away. They don't come forward, in the composition. They sit backward. And the same thing, in, picking out, what's in light, what's in shadow. And I want you to notice something here, because I've seen some of you do this. you know, if her face is generally in shadow and it's casting a shadow on the fabric, you see, these shadows have to connect up. You know, they're not separate things. Just because it goes, you know, onto a piece of clothing doesn't mean that the shadows stop. And some of you will put, you know, shadows to turn the form on the skin, you know, or the flesh areas. But then when you get to the clothing, the shadow stops. And that doesn't happen. You know, those shadows, you know, continue across all of those surfaces and forms as they change. And so, you know, just keep in mind that when you're dealing with light and shadow, it's not just on the skin tones or the face or things, it's also onto, you know, the actual clothing, you know, that the person is wearing. Like this sleeve right here is casting a shadow across her arm, right? And the light's coming in from, you know, up above and behind her, right? So she's getting a little bit of light, not a lot, you know, but a little bit on the upper half of her forearm. And then as it turns, it goes into shadow, right? And you can, you know, if you squint your eye down, you can begin to see those steps in value, those 5 steps I keep talking about. You know, so you've got light, you know, even though it's not like bright highlight back here by the elbow, you still have light. You got mid-tone, you got a core shadow, and then you've got, you know, shadow, and then you've got reflected light here right at the edge. And it's just enough to make that arm begin to feel round. You know, as the arm goes down to the wrist and you get to the hand, the angle of the plane changes. You know, the upper, well, the base of the hand is moved at a different angle than the arm. So it's catching more light. Again, you know, kind of like the elbow back here. So that means that they're kind of in a similar orientation to the light, right? So, and then, you know, again, he could have gone back in and he could have put in a lot of detail, you know, on these peppers. But he gives you, again, just enough to tell you what it is, but he doesn't overwork it. And this is a pretty good sized painting. You know, this is probably about 5 feet tall. So it's maybe not life size, but just a little bit under.
And he uses primarily the primary and secondary colors in that, not a lot of different things,
Right.
Other things.
Yeah, he doesn't mix a lot of neutrals. You know,
Yeah.
just about everything that he does is, you know, as you said, you know, falls into a primary, secondary category, and it's modified just slightly. You know, it might be slightly grayed down in comparison to, you know, the other colors around it, but yeah, it's pretty much so, you know, primary, secondary colors. You know, same thing here. You know, with the sagebrush, if you begin to look at it, it almost kind of reminds me of, you know, a Van Gogh, just with the brushwork. But, you know, there's really very little that's neutral in there. You know, the probably the most neutral he gets is, you know, these strong darks in here. And even those, you know, seem to have quite a bit of color in them. They're not just straight black. But, you know, yellows and oranges, you know, the greens and the blue-green, you know, in the sage. So, you know, this kind of reminds me of like Gauguin. You know, just to use the color, the composition, the figures. And I like how he, again, you know, kind of simplifies the landscape, you know, back behind them. And it becomes very abstract. You know, a lot of brushwork and layering of paint, you know, but it all kind of holds together into these, you know, simplified shapes. And if we just, you know, take a look at, like, let's just take a look again, you know, at the brushwork, you know, and the skin tones. It keeps it very simple. You know, she's not in direct sunlight. You know, she's more or less overall in shadow. And so there's no high contrast, you know, on any of the appendages, you know, the arms, hands, face. But there's, you know, just subtle value changes. But look at the structure of the hand. You know, it's really nicely done. And the shoulder. Again, you know, he gives really just an anatomy, you know, in the shoulder and arm area to give it some shape and form, but he doesn't overdo it. Same thing with the face. Again, you know, there's no bright highlight overall. If you look at this, the figure in comparison to the background is lit up. You know, the figures themselves are, you know, in shadow. They're not in direct light. Here's another example. And even though these figures are fairly simplified, you know, he gives you just enough that they feel credible. You understand the anatomy, you know, but he hasn't overdone it. He hasn't overworked it. And so, flowers, you know. So, you know, he has a good grasp of painting, you know, figures, still lives, landscape, you know, even portraits. And what is this? Angels Arguing. I thought that was a good title on this one. There's a semi-nude. And then this piece here, I was, again, you know, now this is a colored pencil. This is, again, you know, kind of like a study, you know, a concept, an idea that he's working out. And you'll see this painting a little bit later, how he develops it. But, you know, this is not a quick process for him. You know, I mean, this is a fairly, you know, major undertaking. And so, you know, he really kind of works everything out in the drawing as far as his ideas and concepts. And then he develops it further. There's a piece of architecture. And again, you know, primary, secondary colors. Find a neutral in it, please. You know, maybe right here in the window, you know, a little bit. But overall, you know, most of it is, you know, relatively, you know, strong colors. Notice the gradation in the sky. See, you know, darker as it moves up to the horizon line, gets lighter. Another really lovely piece. You know, the red against the, you know, greens, blue greens. And again, look at the horizon line. How you know, he transitions from this yellow to an orange to this bright red. And really, when you look at the dress and the light back here, this red, you know, this seems to be more intense. You know, this is actually a tint. You know, he's added white to it to lighten it. But somehow, you know, he still gets this to hold together and sit backward and not compete, you know, with the figure. So again, you know, it's managed, you know, pretty thoughtfully. I'm going to skip ahead because this is the painting that I was talking about that we saw the drawing for. And so this is the final work. Now, this painting is pretty big, and you'll get an idea of the scale when you see him, you know, working on it at the easel. So again, you know, these are not small little paintings. Here's another shot. He's a little further along.
Color in the painting is very, very rich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, again, you know, he's using a lot of really pretty direct color. And it's not modified, it's not muted down a lot, but you know, it's kind of how he's managing, you know, layering the color on. In fact, let's go back to this shot. Yeah, okay, no, let's go to the other shot. Okay, notice as he painted, you know, the fabric, right? Before he started putting in any of the brighter, lighter detail, you see how he develops the pattern and the design on it? And, you know, so he's got this is not black. You know, this is actually a very, very dark red. So he's taken red and he's added a mixture of black, where he's made a black, but he's made a black with a lot of red in it. So it's a dark. And so you see he's set up this overall design and pattern with the contrast between, you know, the lighter part of the fabric and then the areas where he's going to lay in the design, you know, the brighter pattern over it. And you see it gives it a structure, and you understand the folds and how the pattern works, you know, across the fabric. And then he comes back in and he layers in, you know, these brighter elements. I mean, it's a time-consuming process. You know, this was not a, you know, something he did in an afternoon. You know, he worked on that for quite a while, I think. Another one of his painting. And this is, you know, around a pueblo. And, you know, you've got the oven next to it. You know, it's a mud brick oven. And then you've got the landscape. And again, you know, really, you know, very few modified colors, you know, really kind of grayed down. But, you know, he's got, again, you know, it's pretty intense color. And yet, again, you know, he plays it against these dresses and things that, you know, are pretty low key, you know, as far as intensity. In fact, they're probably more neutral, you know, than anything else in the painting. And yet, you know, they pop forward because of the value contrast. And again, look at the use of how he simplified the shapes in the fabric and the light and shadow. See, and he's created more contrast in the figures, you know, overall. Though he gets pretty close up here in the mountains. But it still works. You know, these still move forward. this sits back, you get an understanding of the structure, of the architecture around them and the foreground. And so everything kind of sits, in kind of a nice order.
Does he seem to outline a lot of his figures and objects with black?
Yeah, he does. He uses line in a lot of cases, even around these various elements. You can see, where there's an outline. And I think that's just part of his painting process. He'll lay in and more or less draw with the paint, as he moves, through the painting. And then he'll, build in his midtones and lights, on top, leaving that edge in most cases. And again, it goes back to that idea of he's simplifying and creating shapes, and those shapes begin to fall together to create forms and different elements in the painting. But he, I think he's a good person to look at as far as, just managing values, managing color. Really nice use of color, and just about all of his pieces, really nicely done. So it's got kind of a sense of being simplified and kind of graphic, but still just enough. It's that nice balance where it still feels, credible, and he hasn't flattened out all the shapes. Like the little fold in the blanket, again, to explain the form. Now, he could have gotten real futzy, in a lot of these areas, but he didn't. He gave you just enough. It's like that fold was important because it kind of wrapped around the form of this guy and gave you sort of the indication that his hand was underneath there, gripping the blanket, and pulling it around him. So see, same thing with the show. Again, he gives you enough, but it's kind of simplified shape. There's not a lot of blending, a lot of gradation and stuff going on there. Last but not least, this is St. Augustine. He went on vacation, and I think St. Augustine for me is probably like one of my favorite places on the East Coast. I've been there like on 2 different occasions, and St. Augustine to me feels a lot like home, a lot like Monterey. It's got a lot of that same vibe. It's fairly busy, small size city, along the coastline, but it's still at the same time, the pace there is a little more laid back, a little easier going than living in like a large metro area like Atlanta or something like that. But, you look at, again, use of color and contrast. And again, it works, it holds together, really nicely. So anyway, so that's Edward Gonzalez. Anybody got any comments? Anything to say about his work? Like it, don't like it?
I really like his command of light and shadow within shadow. I mean, just captures, and again, simple.
And I was looking at the folds. Sometimes he made them very distinguishable. Other times he made them very soft. Sometimes he you know, as you say, just a hint sometimes. I was looking at the fold. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and again, you know, if you know, if he was using a model or, you know, whatever he was working from, there was probably a lot more there, you know, that he ended up editing and leaving out. And again, you know, he simplified it down to what do I really need here, you know, and if I put that fold in there, does that really help me describe the shape and form, or is it a distraction? And you know, I think he's got a pretty good handle on you know, on what he puts in, what he leaves out. That's really important. You know, that's probably one of the most important things in, you know, trying to create a piece of artwork. It's like, how much is enough? And a lot of times, you know, a lot of the extra, you know, futzing and flourish and stuff really end up detracting from the painting rather than adding to it. So I think he's, you know, he's a good example of somebody you can look at as far as their work goes. You know, to get some inspiration, you know, use of color, composition, you know, pretty well-rounded artist. And you can find him on Facebook, you know, that's through his pages. And like I say, he doesn't have a lot of work up, you know, but the work that he does have, you know, is very solid, you know, very well done. And, you know, nice stuff. So, so I've got one more artist to share with you. And for those of you who do watercolor, I think you'll really love her work. It borderlines on being abstract, and she paints a lot of landscape. But she, you know, she's a big fan of these Daniel Smith watercolors, which, you know, I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a bunch of them off of Anita last time we had, you know, a big run on brushes. And she had all this paint that, you know, she needed to kind of get rid of. So she was willing to sell it for, you know, really, really cheap. And again, you know, in looking at some of these pieces, she works in a variety of sizes, but, you know, surprisingly, you know, some of these pieces pretty big, you know, fairly good size.
What was her name, Charles?
Sarah Yeoman is her name.
Thank you.
And, but, you know, she's using some opaques in here. You know, you can definitely see, you know, she had some China white or something in there. Jean would enjoy seeing that since she likes to, you know, put acrylic in there with the watercolor. But, you know, she has this way of getting this nice sense of light and atmosphere in her paintings. And so I'm just going to go through these little at a time. And also look at the use of color. Now, where Edward used mainly primary, secondary colors, she uses a lot of gray and a lot of neutrals. And then she'll put just little hints and accents of color. And a lot of times, you know, she reduces her color to really be kind of like a two-color composition. So like in this case, yellow and blue with the gray and the neutral. And it's really a nice, effective way of working. It looks very wet, you know, and look how granular, you know, the paint is on the surface. That's the thing I noticed about those watercolors is they have this sort of nice kind of organic, grainy kind of feel to how the paint kind of diffuses and kind of, you know, mushes together. Let's kind of blow this up. if you just look at the surface. The other thing I like about her work is, as far as I can tell from what I can see, in looking at a variety of the paintings that she's done, she doesn't draw. You know, she doesn't come back in with a pencil or anything and put lineal lines down. She basically, you know, builds the painting up, again, using like a lot of the lighter values, building toward the dark, which is the process that you use in watercolor. But she doesn't really lay those darks in, you know, till the end. You know, all of her lighter colors and things are down first. And then she uses those darks really to kind of, you know, create a drawing and define edges and things like that. Like I said, you know, some of these are pretty good size. That's probably a good, you know, 48 inches, you know, from top to bottom, if not bigger. So that's a pretty good size sheet of watercolor paper to be trying to manage. And then just imagine this, you know, on a tabletop or something and wet, and trying to get and keep, you know, all these areas wet so that the paint would go down and diffuse. You know, that had to be a bit of a challenge. See, water lilies, you know, we've seen different interpretations of those, but again, you know, in a watercolor media, and I'm guessing she's using Frisket or some kind of resist, you know, to keep these areas, these really light areas, masked, so that as she lays down the dark color, she doesn't have to work around all of them. She can just work in kind of a broad, you know, in kind of a broad way with a big brush and just kind of gradating the color as she moves down. And then she lifts that mask and then goes back in and works the color into all of these. Could be either way, really, I guess. Crows. And see, she just uses a silhouette, but she, you know, she's accurate, you know, as far as the shape goes. And she doesn't do a lot of modeling. In fact, she doesn't do really any modeling in this. You know, they're pretty much so flat shapes. And yet, you know what they are. She's giving you just enough there. You know, glass and transparency plus light coming through there. And look at the shadows and how the light's refracting through the glass. Really well managed. I saw this and it's like, huh, that looks a lot like a Winslow Homer painting. Some of his watercolors. Same basic subject. You know, but again, really nice, really loose, you know, application of color. And even in this, you know, just kind of looking around, you know, you don't see, well, you know, maybe you begin to see a hint of a pencil line or a drawing back in there. So at least on this piece, you know, she put down kind of a light sketch before she started putting down color. Again, you know, really nice use of, you know, hard edges, soft edges, And again, you know, she must be using some kind of mask in here to keep those areas, you know, clear and light, and then working, you know, working the dark over it, you know, wetter and kind of looser. Nice flower. And again, you know, the use of light and shadow. The light then falling into shadow here. And see, it really takes your eye, you know, right into this area as the focal point. Another very wet, loose looking landscape. There's something in progress. You can see, you know, she's got the paper taped down to, you know, fairly good sized board. You know, and she's just working, you know, really, really wet. Now there may be some kind of mask or something, you know, in some of these areas that she's going to lift out a little bit later. But again, you know, look at the really kind of limited use of color, you know, kind of a blue and sort of a, probably a sienna, like a raw sienna, which is, it's a little bit darker than yellow ochre. But those are primarily the two colors that she's using in this. You know, plus again, you know, that neutral. And just enough to suggest, you know, that this is water, you know, and reflecting, you know, the trees. See, you know, she doesn't put a lot of detail in this canoe. Again, she just gives you enough to say that there's, you know, a canoe there. She doesn't overwork it. More of those flowers back by that tree line, different composition, but same basic subject. Nice vista there. Again, you know, real simplified shapes and forms. So there's the finished piece that we kind of saw in progress. And then here's a set of Adirondack chairs. Really nicely done. Has a nice atmospheric feel to this particular piece. And again, she must be using some kind of mask in here to keep these finer light, you know, details. So she's not doing anything by accident. You know, she's pretty much so thinking these out, you know, pretty thoroughly and planning them. Now in this piece, again, you can see where she's used opaques, you know, white with maybe a little bit of color in it to, you know, block out, you know, some of these darker areas. Some really nice tools in the use of color, you know, how she's brought the warmer colors up here, you know, kept these darker and got them to recede and sit back. Again, this kind of reminds me a lot of Winslow Homer's work. Just really, really a nice study. And see what she did with the face here? See, she gave you just enough to say, okay, you know, it's a face. There's light hitting, you know, his beard and the side of his face here. And then the rest of this is falling back into shadow. You know? So it's a face, but you really start looking at it, it's not. It's a very simplified shapes and where the light and dark are placed. And it just gives you a suggestion that there's a face there. A very similar composition to some of the other flowers we saw, the tulips. But again, you know, different use of color, you know, darker red rather than purple. And then more yellows and oranges. You know, changing temperature and getting these to move forward while these sit back. Another landscape. Real simplified. So you've got the same landscape here, basically. You know, this is treated as a value study, all in neutrals, and this is the final, final painting with color. Again, you know, almost abstract. But again, look at the quality of the color and just the grain of the paper and how the paint lays down on it. Really enjoyed using that paint. It's, it adds, people keep calling me, I don't know why. It adds a different quality, to the painting itself, just kind of the organic, kind of granular nature of it. Again, you can begin to see some sketching, some pencil line down here. Very loose. She's not doing any real tight drawing. Real nice feel to this. The light hitting the trees back here and all the rest of this, and it's sitting in shadow. Evidently, she does a lot of canoeing up and down this river. Kind of guessing, I'm not real sure where she lives, but I'm kind of guessing that it's somewhere probably up around the Great Lakes, somewhere in northern. And I'm jealous, the place she lives in is this cabin that's down by the river. And she's got all this old arts and crafts furniture in there. And her studio is out on the porch, this cabin. There she is, out there sitting on a rock, painting. Got her sketchbook with her. Now, I talk a lot about hard and soft edges. And I want all of you just to kind of take a minute and really look at this carefully and where the hard and soft edges are in it. You know, she really wants you to focus right here. And everything else, you know, there's stuff there, but it's just a suggestion. And it's very, very soft, very wet, very loose. And she gives you just enough, you know, just enough, you know, that, you know, it draws your eye right where she wants you to. You've seen that before, you know. This seems, you know, more like a study where the other, you know, seemed like a more finished painting. Yeah, again, see very little color in there. That's mainly, you know, just this yellow against these neutrals.
What is that?
Pardon?
Oh, the picture just before, I was just wondering what it was.
Waterfall or stream.
I know that it was gray and black or whatever.
Uh-huh.
It was gray and black. It's one just above that.
And the one before this, like right here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you know, again, it's a suggestion of you got trees, you know, the
I meant the one before that one too.
one before this.
Well, we'll go down right there. Oh, what is that?
This painting right here.
Now you went back again. Go down one. Okay.
That one. Okay. What does it look like to you?
Not that one. The next one.
Waterfall.
Above that, it looks all gray.
Okay. That's
right there. Right there. Mm-hmm.
That's the one I'm on. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It looks like trees, I guess.
Uh-huh. Okay. Trees. And you got maybe a little bit of sun coming up. You know, probably an early morning. See? And again, you know, she's minimalized it. You know, she's taking it down, you know, to just really the bare minimum. Now, just to give you a hint that these are trees, you know, and you've got the rest of the landscape down here, and you can make out of that anything you want to, you know, whether that's grass or, you know, whatever, but you've got this opening and you're seeing the horizon line back there with, you know, maybe the early morning sun coming up. And it's probably a little bit, you know, I mean, the way I would read it is it's, you know, kind of early and it's foggy, you know, one of those gray days, similar to today. But again, you know, she's eliminated all the color and it's all value, except for this little hint of color right here along, you know, the edge of the horizon line. Think it makes sense now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this is the last one. And again, you know, she's hinting that there's all this stuff there, but you know, is she taking any time to very cautiously and very carefully, you know, put in any real amount of detail? No. No, it's all kind of a suggestion. And see, that's the, you know, kind of the powerful part of painting is that you don't have to put in a lot of details. And yet.
And her name was what?
Sarah.
Her name.
Yeah. Sarah is her first name. Yeoman is her second name. Okay.
Yeoman?
Yeah, I believe so. She's on Facebook as well, but I haven't looked her up on Google yet, but I'm probably going to. She has a lot of workshops and stuff like that. You know, but nice stuff. You know, really, really nice stuff. So, anyway. Okay.
I really like the looseness. It looks like watercolors, and it looks painterly. Like you say, not having the sharp details.
Yeah, she occasionally she'll put in, you know, some sharper edges and things, but she's very conscientious about when and where she uses that. And, you know, for the most part, you know, she just looks like she has a lot of fun playing with the paint and letting the paint sort of do what it organically does. So, you know, it's a nice effect. So, at any rate, anybody see anything they like today? Anything stand out to you? Anything you're inspired to go do, play with now? Anyone?
Well, I would like to loosen up my landscapes like that. I may have to try something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like
Okay.
Nikolai and Edward Gonzalez.
Yeah. Yeah. And in reply to John, my suggestion to you is get some kind of reference, you know, landscape reference or whatever, and try not drawing, you know, before,
okay.
yeah,
Right.
before you start laying down color, you know, just use loosely, you know, and wet. And after you sort of lay that color in and let things kind of mush together and stuff, you know, then go back in and, you know, begin to tighten up just, you know, some area of the painting so that it becomes more of the focal point. Okay.
Well, did you see the email I sent you with the 3 pictures of my process?
I did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that sort of what I'm doing in the first, where I showed you, if you recall, my initial stage, I sort of lay out, block out colors and let things flow and run. Then I go in with detail.
Right. Yeah. But you see, again, your first step along the way was you did this fairly light sketch, but you got pretty tight when it came to the figures.
Right.
And the thing is, and just to share an idea with you, okay, the thing about drawing a line is a line becomes a boundary, right? An edge.
Right.
And you can approach it one of 2 ways. Okay, you can put that line down, you can define that edge, and or, you know, a more painterly way is lay down the value and then develop an edge through the use of contrast with light and dark or change of color and something like that, you know, to begin to define that edge and leave, you know, let that line go. One way is a little more exploratory. Another one is you're sort of limiting yourself by putting that line down there.
Yeah, you're confined to that line.
Yeah, once that goes down there, see, that doesn't change.
Right.
Is the problem. And so, you know, if you have some kind of inaccuracy in the drawing, then that's going to carry through the whole piece.
All right.
And that's one of the hardest things, you know, in teaching painting is that, you know, people are comfortable with that idea of I'm putting an edge down there and it stops right there and I'm making a definitive decision about it. And now I'm not going to change my mind about it, you know, rather than, you know, taking the exploratory process, which is, you know, you're beginning to find these big blocks of color and then you're you know, you're kind of honing it down and creating those shapes and edges, you know, with the paint rather than drawing. So it's, you know, it's again, you know, it's a different way of thinking about it. And it does change not only the way you see things, but the overall end result is that in that exploratory process, you know, you find things that later on the viewer, again, because it's not so refined and tight, it keeps it open. You know, it keeps it open to whatever they've experienced in life and them coming to it and looking at it and making it their own. So, yeah.
I'll give it a shot. Thank you.
Yeah. Eloise, you were talking about you like Fetchin and Edward Gonzalez work. What is it?
Yes. Edward Gonzalez convinced me that maybe I can draw and then paint the drawing. I guess be more graphic, I suppose, and emerge realist, classical realism, I guess, from that.
Yeah.
The outlines were guides, and I don't outline normally. So.
Yeah. Well, you know, outlining the shapes was something that kind of really began with what we call the post-impressionist, you know, and they used line. And the line, if you look at a lot of it, you know, and the way that artists use it today, probably not to the best effect, is that they always outline in black. And if you looked at the post-impressionists, they did not. You know, they might use a dark, but it was usually a dark color, like a dark red or blue or purple or something like that, dark green. And sometimes the colors of those outlines would change. You know, it would start off red and it would end up green or blue or something. So, you know, if you want to take that approach, experiment with that a little bit, you know, and in trying to do, you know, use a brush and draw those lines, but be willing to change the color as you move along. Okay. You know, and a lot of times when they did that, as they changed the color to sort of the color family, or at least the overall temperature of what that area was going to be once they filled it in anyway. So that the line was there, but it was more subtle, and it wasn't, you know, it didn't flatten the whole thing out, and it didn't become a stained glass window, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay?
Okay.
So, you know, kind of play with that. Okay? And I mean, it works. You know, in most cases, I mean, it works. You know, even since you like to do portraiture, you know, that even works, you know, with faces and things like that. You know, if you change the temperature and color, you know, of that line. So again, it relates to the area of the face, you know, that you're painting, right? Rather than just being one continuous, you know, color and value. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Anybody got anything we need to talk about before we all go away? Anybody want to? Anything going on in the world with any of you? Nope. Other than people calling me every 5 minutes? Yeah. All right. Veronica, how's life treating you? You've been quiet today.
Yeah, really quiet. I'm processing everything that I've seen this morning. I liked all of the artists. Watercolor still escapes me. I'm kind of having regret that when we were at the Brush Lady, I didn't purchase watercolors from her
Oh.
to experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fun medium. But you know, you use acrylics, right?
I use oil most of the time, with some acrylic bases sometimes, yes.
Okay. So here's an idea for you, okay? Rather than going out and buying watercolors, why don't you just use the acrylic, and rather than keeping the paint opaque and thick, water it way down and use it wet into wet.
Okay.
The acrylic is really good at using on a very wet surface, and it does some interesting things all on its own that will get you a similar, not exact, but similar effect to watercolor. Okay?
Okay, I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, and you primarily work on canvas, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any like heavyweight, like mixed media paper or watercolor?
I do. I do.
Yeah. Then you know, treat it like a watercolor. You know, use it on paper, and again, use it with kind of washes and just very wet. You know, wet your paper before you start laying in color, and let it kind of diffuse and soften. You know, and then as it dries, then you can get, you know, cleaner, tighter edges and things. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, play with that. That would be kind of fun, and it's a very different way of working. The good news is, you know, using acrylic that way, is that, you know, as the paper dries and you work, you know, and you know, begin to lay in those darks and tighter edges and things. If you have areas that you really don't like, or you know, you don't like the way the paint went down, you can always go back and opaque it out. But you can't, you know, I won't say you can't do it with watercolor, but it's more difficult to do. Okay. So yeah, so you might find something that will give you kind of a nice happy medium. Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. Anybody else? Ilan, you've been kind of quiet. What's going on with you?
I enjoyed the class.
Yeah.
Especially Nikolai, but he is like a real artist, you know, old-fashioned and so on.
Okay.
The Mexican guy, Gonzalez, I liked his heavy colors, you know. It's really interesting how he paints. And he goes back a little bit. It's like his very simplified paintings, but beautiful art. I liked it.
Yeah, I really don't know a lot about him, but I really do like his work. You know, for a contemporary living artist, you know, working today, you know, he in that particular genre and style, I just kind of like.
Yeah.
He's got this nice feel to it, you know, and it's, you know, it feels authentic. It feels, you know, like real. Like that's kind of, you can kind of see how he kind of connects to that in life. So
Yeah.
real nice.
With the Sarah, the watercolor lady, I don't know. I didn't hook up with her.
Yeah. Well, you work generally, so
I need to look her up a little bit more.
Okay, all right, and you know, again, you know, experiment, you know, play with the mediums that you've got. Even if you're using, well, and this kind of goes back to Veronica again, even if you're using oil paint, a lot of illustrators like, oh God, I'm having a senior moment here. It fell out of my. Anyway,
Join the club.
yeah, like there's a guy by the name of Michael Dudash and Bart Forbes. That's the one I was looking for. They used oil paint, and they used oil paint a lot like watercolor. You know, they would do a very tight lineal drawing on a really heavily gessoed surface, and then they would lay down this dark layer of watercolor and pick out and lift out the lights, and then go back in and put, just like thin, almost like watercolory washes and things in over, this this base that they created after it dried completely. And in a lot of cases, you can't really tell the differences to whether it's oil paint or whether it's watercolor. So there's lots of different ways of working with all these mediums, and you just, experiment and play with it.
My issue with you, the artists that you pick up, my issue is that I like abstract art.
Right.
And all those are realistic painters.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you
not so much the water lady, but the rest,
yeah,
from this class,
mm-hmm,
are very realistic.
Yeah, but
so
here's an idea
it's a challenge for me.
Yeah, here's an idea for you, Ilan. Go online and look up Nikolai Fechin, right? And see if you can find some of his paintings, and then just pick out an area that you like in the painting and try to enlarge it and just zoom in on it. And I'll bet you that you'll have a really nice abstract painting.
Okay. I'll do it.
Yeah, because that's, again, that's how Fechin painted. It was all in essence an abstract, because it was just very simplified shapes and changes in value.
Okay.
Yeah. So, again, it's like, rather than standing back 5 or 6 feet, from the canvas, now you're only standing like 4 inches away, and you're just focused in on a small part of it. And it becomes really abstract at that point. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Anyway. Anybody else? John, got anything to say? Armando, you've been quiet.
No, I'm trying to talk, but everybody's talking, so I don't want to be rude.
All right, well, I'll tell you what. Be quiet for a moment. What do you got to say?
Well, I look at that guy Gonzalez online. He has a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, like Alan said, he's simple, and he paint mostly about basis of people daily life,
mm-hmm,
thing they do in life. I like his style, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, hopefully all of you something that you like today and got some kind of inspiration from. So, yeah.
So how was your 4th of July celebration?
My 4th of July was fine.
Uh-huh.
Were you not here the other day? I kind of talked about the fact I went to go see this really, really great documentary film that's out in the theater. It's called Summer of Soul. I would highly recommend. You don't have to go to the theaters to see it. You can actually get it on Hulu. But I recommend that everybody, it's about an hour and 45 minutes. Yeah. Take some time, watch it. It's called Summer of Soul.
It was a series. That was a series. It's over an hour and a half.
About 45 minutes, something like that. A little shy of 2 hours.
I thought it was a series. I thought it was going to have like.
No, it's a documentary. It was originally shot by a CBS News producer, but it was never aired because it ended up competing with Woodstock and the Moon Landing in 1969. So it just got like a really minuscule, brief mention by Walter Cronkite on the news, but they never showed any images. They never played any of the footage. Pretty much so. I mean, there was like literally hours and hours and hours of this concert shot, on film, and it was all put in the can and shelved and just put away. Nobody ever saw it until this fairly young guy had some kind of contact with this guy from CBS and began to look into it and began to look at the footage, and the two of them sat down and edited it and put it into this documentary film. And it's great. I mean, it's really, really great stuff. And it gives you a good insight into kind of the mood of the country at the time. This is just after a lot of the riots in '68 when King was assassinated. A good look at what the culture was like in Harlem at that time. And just, you get to see all of these, musicians like Gladys Knight, who at that time, she was a teenager, she was like really, really young, and same thing with Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder was playing on the stage at the very moment when man first stepped onto the moon. Mm-hmm. And that's why it got covered, because it was competing against those other news stories, and it just got shelved, as not being as relevant. And it's a real shame, because it was wonderful. They had Nina Simone there. It's the first time I listened to a lot of Nina Simone's music, but I had never seen her perform, any kind of film, documentary, anything on her. And she was amazing, just the footage that they had on her. So again, I highly recommend, taking some time and seeing it. It's really well done. And I think you guys will enjoy it. Okay.
Changing the subject, did you go to see the Bangkok exhibition?
The Bangkok?
Yeah, that Dutch painter who cut his ear himself. Bangkok. I can't pronounce
it.
Yes.
Oh, no, I did not go see. You're
I don't like the location.
Yeah, you're talking about the virtual kind of experience, the Van Gogh experience that they had here in Atlanta.
Yes, actually.
Yeah,
over there,
it's very nice.
Over there in the bag and Decatur, and it's expensive.
Uh-huh.
I don't like the location. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been there. There were a couple of things that I wanted to go see. There was that, and there was an exhibition on the Sistine Chapel that I wanted to go see. And I need to find out whether they're still around, because I'd like to go to both of those, actually. So.
It's here in Atlanta?
Yeah, they were both here in Atlanta. Yeah, I think the Sistine Chapel was at the West End Art Center, of all places.
Yeah.
But again, it's kind of a virtual thing. They set up this gallery area and it's all projected. But, rather than seeing the Sistine Chapel at, like 30 or 40 feet over your head, it's close and personal at about 8 feet. But you're still looking up, because it's all projected on the ceilings and things. But yeah, it was. Yeah, I'd like to get out and see both of those actually. So, and there's
the Van Gogh. I went to see the Van Gogh. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Especially, I enjoyed the last part. The realistic, like you sit with a system and you see it in 3D, and you feel like you are at the city. You walk the village there. You go into his painting. It's just unbelievable. I've never seen something like that.
Yeah. I've talked to a couple of people who went to it, and it's pretty. It's supposed to be pretty amazing. So it would be worth going to go see. You know,
So
get out and about. So
you don't see the real painting from you. It's
no, it's a different kind of experience. I mean, it's his art, but it's, you know, it's being interpreted, you know, into like a 3D experience. So
you see some art also in other parts of the show, but when you start going out of the show, you get to see this room that people are sitting in chairs all around the back wall there, and you are watching it. It's just the experience itself was something to go back to see, you know.
Yeah.
Because Van Gogh, I see him all the time. I like the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, he had some beautiful work.
Oh, unbelievable, unbelievable. And you think about, he died very young. He didn't paint many years, you know.
What I think about 8 years, 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, something like that. It's the only, and to end up his life with, especially now after all those years, with a name like Van Gogh, with such a limited experience, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that's really incredible about him is, again, his short lifespan. But you look at the number of paintings that he did. Talking about being prolific, I mean, he did. He created as many pieces of art as people who had lived 70 and 80 years. You know,
yeah,
artwork for 70 or 80. His output.
He was
amazing.
Yeah, he was like a painting machine.
Yeah, he was very much so. You know. Yeah, it was incredible stuff. And then you know, actually see the paintings and the quality of the brushwork and, you know, how he managed color, stuff like it, were really incredible. You know, so, you know, go see that stuff. You know, you know, have a little bit of fun. You know, as long as you're vaccinated and, you know, wear a mask and you're safe. Get out in the world a little bit now. So it's getting, you know, getting manageable out there, I guess. So,
yeah.
Anyhow, anybody else? Anything that we got to say before we go away? Because I got to go pick up a county cell phone here. Be over there by 1 o'clock. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Today we can start calling Benson Center for the pool, right?
I believe so. Yeah. Well, I thought it was the 12th.
I don't know. I'll try it.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, it's the 12th that they're beginning to open up the pool. But
okay.
Monday.
No, just enlisting, you know, registering.
Right. Yeah. I think you can register, but the problem with Benson is that the pool, I don't think they're going to open it because it's having some issues. But I know the gym is open.
I go in our neighborhood every day to the pool, but because it's an outside pool, days like today and the whole week is going to rain, so it's good to have an inside pool.
Why would you care if it rained if you're going to be wet anyway?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's not better. Just walking to the pool, you know.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you'll get to
okay.
All right. Anyway, I'm gonna cut this off because I got to get ready and head out the door. But it was great seeing all of you. We'll see you guys.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Send in.
See you mañana.
On. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Okay. Bye.